I'm gonna keep on trying till I reach the higher ground. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The High Ground, which is episode 12 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of the series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video I cover the third season episode, The High Ground. So The High Ground is the episode where the Enterprise is negotiating with a Federation ally who is currently facing terrorist attacks from a separatist group that wants their home continent to be independent, and Beverly Crusher and Data Worf are on the planet when such a terrorist attack takes place, and then Beverly is taken captive by the terrorists, who are using a dimensional shifting device which is undetectable by sensors, so much more insidious than a transporter. However, the cost of it is causing the people who use it to die, so they abduct Beverly Crusher to try to save the people's lives and reverse the effects of the dimensional shifting, but she's unsuccessful in doing so. Meanwhile, Riker works with the local security to try to get Beverly Crusher back. However, the terrorists interpret this as the Federation siding with their enemies, so they decide to destroy the Enterprise. But when their attack is unsuccessful, they take Picard captive and want to demand the Federation get involved and negotiate a peace where the terrorists will get everything they want. However, this is thwarted because Wesley finds out where they're holding Picard and Crusher captive, so Riker and security forces lead a rescue that is successful, and the security officer kills the lead terrorist. So they're unsure if the terrorist attacks will ever stop. But Beverly and Picard return to the Enterprise safe and sound. So, my little intro there. Every time throughout whenever I heard of this episode, especially when I was first watching it in the 90s, I always made me think of that song. Now, I knew it as a Red Hot Chili Peppers song. I didn't find out until just a couple years ago, where I heard the original. They played the original at my work a lot. Was by Stevie Wonder, and I think that's actually the better known version. But I always just heard it from the Red Hot Chili Peppers because I used to listen to a lot of 90s alternative rock. I like the Stevie Wonder version too, or the original. It is a version, even though it is an original, it's still a version. But I like the original. But I'm more familiar with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Anyway, that is neither here nor there. So I decided beforehand, because this is a tough episode to talk about without getting into the whole topic of terrorism, because that's what this episode is. It is basically a message episode about terrorism. Now, it doesn't seem to have a very strong message other than terrorism bad, but as I said, I always try to watch a lot of other reviews and read reviews and get other people's opinions on it. And I heard some very interesting opinions about how Star Trek can often be very preachy and tell you, this is what you should think. And there's some episodes, to be fair, that I like that are like that. Past Tense over in Deep Space Nine. It is preaching at you, but I love the preaching because I think it's something that should be preached about, but it is telling you what to think. And I think that turns a lot of people off, and so a lot of people prefer episodes or stories that present all the sides and saying, these are the dynamics, here's what's involved with this issue, here's this side, here's that side, here's all these flanking dynamics, so you decide. And so I've heard some people saying that that's what they thought this episode did. And that's why they really liked it. That they thought that it presented like all the situation and the facts and let you, the audience, decide, and thought that's much better than being preachy. Now, for me, it depends. Like, it depends on what the subject is, how it's handled in either the preachiness or the ambiguous way of going about it. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know there's more Star Trek episodes that do take this sort of more ambiguous direction rather than the preachy one. But I'm fine with either one. It just depends on what the subject matter is and what the story is and how it, there's all these other factors. So for me, it could go either way. But it's funny because all of the writers involved in writing this episode didn't like it, which is interesting because I think there are worse episodes of season 3 than this one. Not that much because, as I said, I kind of like season 3. The Price, Mirage of Troy, Captain's Holiday, spring to mind, and episodes that are worse than this one. Although, those episodes aren't terrible, I just don't think they're as good as this episode. So I think it's weird that the sort of writing staff, this is the episode that sticks in their minds as not being very good. Now, Melinda Snodgrass is credited for writing this episode, and she talks about how she was very unhappy because originally this story was supposed to be have parallels to the American Revolution and sort of being about like Starfleet and the Romulans sort of fighting over a planet. And I'm not sure. I can't tell from this breakdown exactly what the episode was about, so I can't relate it to you. But it was more of an American Revolution analogy. But Roddenberry didn't like that, and so he shot it down, and the compromise was that they would take it more in the direction of a Northern Ireland analogy. And what Melinda Snodgrass said to that was, she wanted to do this very interesting allegory to the revolution, and she thought it would be really interesting. But instead, it's simply what she referred to as breakfast in Belfast in Star Trek, and they're just going off to Northern Ireland, and she didn't find it nearly as interesting. And it's funny because I believe it was Ronald D. Moore. Let me see if I can find it. No, it was Brennan Braga, who should be noted wasn't even involved in Star Trek at this stage. He didn't join the staff until season 4, but still, what he said that the problem with this episode, and he's probably heard this firsthand from Ronald D. Moore because the two of them worked together and were close, and Ronald D. Moore was here. That the problem with this episode, it was created to be a message episode. That normally they never set out to do, let's do a story about AIDS, or let's do a story about terrorism. That usually it starts with the characters or the science fiction ideas or the story plot or something, and then the message will naturally organically spring from that. And rather than them setting out to do a message episode, and this is a rare example where they set out to do a message episode, and that's why he called it unsuccessful. Michael Piller said that he wasn't particularly happy with this episode because he thought it didn't really have anything to say. But again, that gets into the opinion of sometimes it's better not to tell the audience what to think and instead present a dynamic situation. But that's not how he saw it. Ronald D. Moore also really didn't like this episode. Let's see. So he said, just quoting him, "An abomination is our terrorist show. We didn't have anything interesting to say about terrorism except that it's bad and Beverly gets kidnapped ho-hum. They take her down to the caves and we get to have a nice, big, preachy speeches about terrorism and freedom. Fighting and security forces versus society. It's a very unsatisfying episode, and the staff wasn't really happy with it. Now, all is that to say, I think I stand more on the side with the people who like the dynamics that it presents. That it doesn't necessarily have to be a message episode. And I think it does. I think that a lot of like the good acting. I think this episode has like really good acting, really good dialogue. And I think that overrides any sort of concerns. But okay, so let me get into the political side of this, because this is a tricky one for me, because I decided that I'm not going to go off on any tangents about modern day or historical examples that relate to this episode. And there's particularly some contemporary topics that are very volatile that I will purposely avoid. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And so I decided to not go off in that direction, to try to focus on what the episode says. Now, I do have to mention of course, because it's baked into the episode, the IRA and the Irish unification conflict, or however you want to say it, and I'll start out by saying I do not know much about this subject. Therefore, I'm not going to say much about it. I'm not going to present any opinions, because this isn't something I studied or that I know a hell of a lot about. And I did mention when I did my season reviews, I talked about just in general how, and I'll get more into this later, but just in general how if someone wants their independence, then just fucking give it to them. Which is a very simplistic, overly simplistic way of looking at things. And I got called out on it by comments from people who actually lived in the area. I'm not sure if it was the UK or Ireland. I can't remember, but thereabouts. And calling me out on the fact that the situation was a hell of a lot more complex than that, and I acknowledged that, and I responded to them saying, you're absolutely right. I didn't mean to imply that, the IRA were right or whatever, because I don't know enough about the subject to make a statement like that. I was just making a generalized statement, but but from what I have heard, that it is more complicated than that. That a lot of the people who lived in Northern Ireland prefer to be British citizens. Prefer to be part of the UK, and so it makes the whole subject really iffy. That there were settlers directly from England who settled in Northern Ireland, I believe. Again, I don't know much about the subject, so don't hold me to anything, but from my understanding, it's a lot more complicated. But, so I'm not going to look at it in those terms, although I will mention that this episode was banned in the UK and Ireland for upwards of 20 years. No, it was more like 15 years, because it was 2006, 2007. So it's around, this episode came out in 90. So, that's, 15, 16, 17 years, something like that. And I believe it was never ever shown on British TV that, or I could be wrong, maybe it was Irish TV, but there's other ways to see it, like DVDs and showings. I heard it was even shown at a film festival in 2007 in Ireland. That's weird. But anyway, so, because for them it was probably the lost Next Generation episode. And it was mainly because of the line that Data said where he was giving examples where terrorism was successful, and he said, the Mexican getting their independence from Spain, and then he mentioned the Irish unification of 2024, which, by the way, it's happening this year. Whoa, no. There we go. Irish unification. Set your calendar. It happens in 2024. But anyway, so because of that line, show was banned. Now, to be fair, it might have been more than just that line, because the whole episode is fucking about the Irish, IRA terrorism. So it could have been, this is very obvious as an allegory for that, but that line made it obvious. And so they're like, oh my God, how dare they say this happened? So they banned it from television. I think that's stupid. And to be fair, I think the BBC has banned a couple of original series episodes too, like The Empath, or was it Whom Gods Destroy, one of them, I think. And I think that's really stupid too. Whenever they ban like a Star Trek episode, I think that's dumb. I'm against censorship in general. And for that, and I think this is one of the dumber reasons, to be clear. Come on, get over yourselves. It's just a sci-fi show. But anyway, like, no one's going to watch this and be like, oh my God, Data says Ireland gets their independence in 2024. We better go out now and start bombing. Like, nobody says that. But anyway, I don't know. It's stupid. But anyway, well, Data says it must be true. So anyway, so I'm actually, as I said, I want to examine this topic, but I'm going to try to avoid going off into tangents. So it was my natural reaction, as I said, to whenever I watch it, when I first watched this episode, and when I repeatedly watched this episode, even when I was a teenager, it was my first reaction when the security officer was talking to Riker and she was explaining who the Ansata were. They were like, oh, so they, we occupied, took over their continent, the Western continent, or whatever they called it, or the western part of the continent, or whatever it was, 70 years ago. And they've been wanting independence ever since. And so they've been, setting bombs and fighting us to get their independence. And so, my first reaction when I first saw this episode, and repeatedly ever since when I saw this episode, was to that line was, why don't you just give it to them then? Now, leaving the Irish thing aside, as I said, I don't know enough to talk about it, but I'm talking about this episode, this fictional story of this alien planet in this sci-fi fantasy world. In this particular story, they didn't give me enough information about the ins and outs. Is it just as complicated? But just stating it that simply, we took them over and they want their independence. And now they're setting bombs and doing attacks and killing people. My natural reaction is to go like, well, then give them their independence and they'll stop killing people. Like, I know it's like bad to give in to terrorists, but maybe you shouldn't occupy other sovereign nations in the first place. Like, maybe I have this perspective as an American. As an American, naturally I have the perspective of, wanting, if someone wants independence, give it. Like the Americans want independence from England and they got it. So, and I've heard of other, and I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I've heard of other situations where, for example, I was talking to someone I used to work with from China, and we agreed so much on politics, particularly American politics, but as soon as we brought up, like, how Taiwan wanted independence, and I'm like, well, then they should just give them their independence then. He was like, but it's a part of China. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't want it to be, so let them go. I don't know, that's just, maybe I'm naive, but that's my instinctual, natural reaction. Now, when I do examine this further, there would be some examples where, okay, maybe they shouldn't have independence. For example, the Civil War, the American Civil War, where the Confederate states wanted to secede from the United States, And normally I'd be like, well, if they want to succeed, let them succeed. Who cares? Problem is, the reason why they wanted them to succeed was factually, objectively, not even a point of argument, slavery. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is historical revisionist or just nutso. I'm sorry, because it's there in their freaking statement of succession, and a lot of states' constitutions specifically said, we are doing this because of slavery. It's right there. They said it with their own mouths. They made it very clear that was the whole point of the Civil War, because they wanted to continue slavery. Anyone who tells you otherwise is being dishonest. Intellectually dishonest. But, so in that case, maybe we shouldn't let them secede. Maybe it was actually right for the United States to fight the Civil War to prevent them from doing slavery. Now, again, not getting too much into this topic, but I feel like I have to give the disclaimer. I know that's not the reason why the United States didn't let them succeed. It had more to do with financial reasons and other reasons, and that a lot of the people in the North actually didn't even want to free the slaves. But that's all beside the point. Looking back at it in retrospect, you say, yes, the Union was correct to not let them succeed because they wanted to do slavery. So I had to throw those disclaimers out. So, point is, not every example of someone wanting their independence would necessarily be so. The simplistic view is, oh, well, let them have their independence then. But then, as in the case of Ireland, apparently, but I still don't know anything about it, apparently it can be a lot more complicated than that. It could be a lot of ins and outs. And it's not simply as simple as, oh, just let them be independent. But, that being said, this episode doesn't give me enough information to make that determination. And that's the main issue I have with it, is that it presents a very lazy analogy to the Northern Ireland situation just because. And they're more interested in getting into the merits of terrorism or the morality or lack of morality involved in terrorism than describing exactly the motivations of the terrorists. The motivations of the terrorists are severely underlooked. It was just that one line of, well, they want independence and we didn't want to give it to them. But we don't know any details about that. Like, are this, what are they called? The Routians? Yeah, the Routians. Are the Routians being oppressive? Are they oppressing the Ansata or whatever? Are they discrimination? Is there apartheid? Or are they just citizens and these people are just being unreasonable and just bombing things just because? Like, what is the situation of the occupation? Like, are there a lot of people who, the majority of people who live in that place actually want to be a part of, the larger government that is occupying them? Like, we don't know any of that. All those things and a lot of details would be important for me to make a determination on whether or not this is justified, but it seems like the episode doesn't want to go into that detail. The episode just wants to be like, oh, these people are fine. It's just the terrorists are being unreasonable, and just go with it. But I don't want to. Like, I want more information. I want to decide for myself instead of being told, like, oh yeah, there's terrorists who are blowing people up, and we're supposed to, like, root for these security forces. But then, to be fair to the episode, it does go out of its way to show a gray area when it comes to security forces as well, because the current security chief, who is portrayed as mostly a good person, she points out that her predecessors were like killing people in detention and rounding up kids, and even the lead terrorist guy, Finn, points out that his son was killed in detention. So this probably relates to what her predecessors were doing. And so by doing that, by indiscriminately killing or doing shady shit. They were actually fueling the terrorism. Which again, I'm going to avoid these modern topics. But yeah. So by indiscriminately killing and mistreating their citizens who did nothing wrong, civilians who did nothing wrong, they were actually fueling the terrorism and creating more terrorists. And so that was an interesting shade of gray that they threw in there, and I do appreciate that they didn't present the Russians as simply the good guys. They did throw in some gray there, and which is why I like the episode. But I wish they would have went into more detail. Like, give me more. What was the thing he said in Dharma? He said, Timba, his arms wide. Give me more. Like, I want more information on this, but the episode wasn't interested in that. It was just saying, terrorism bad. These security forces also a little bad, but still terrorism worse. Like, I don't know. Yeah, but so ultimately I'm not gonna decide whether or not I think the Russians were in the right, because the episode didn't give me. So since it didn't give me enough information to determine whether they were justified in occupying the Ansara, I'm going to have to default to agreeing just to my instinctive reaction, which is stop occupying them then. Unless the episode tells me the reason of why that's not an option. Like, as I said, maybe the majority of people who live there actually don't want them to stop occupying. Maybe there are, other reasons or other complications, and it's more complicated than that, but the episode doesn't tell me that. So I have to default to these security forces are actually in the wrong. Now, another interesting discussion to have is, again, avoid modern topic, avoid it. The other interesting discussion to have is when Finn is trying to convince that he is not a terrorist, and the difference between terrorism and just being a freedom fighter is if you win, you're a freedom fighter. If you lose, you're a terrorist. And yeah, there's a lot of, not just modern, but a lot of historical examples on that. And of course, he makes one in this very episode where he says, "I am no different than your George Washington." Now, how this alien living on an alien planet who's mainly terrorism, busy blowing up people, how he knows about George Washington, your guess is as good as mine. But we got like some distant alien planet that is one of the main ones, but just a member of the Federation, which is an alliance that he doesn't really know much about, and just one of those planets, on one of those on that planet, on the continent, about 400 years ago. Like, how would he know this? But anyway, so that is an interest. Now, what the episode, or seems to say, and what Beverly's argument is that generals do not kill civilians. Like, they don't set bombs and blow up children in the bus. And so there's a distinct difference between terrorists and armies or whatever. But I don't know if I side with her, if I think it is as simple as she says, because again, I'm not using real life examples, but sticking to this episode, the security chief even said that her predecessors would kill children in detention who probably didn't do anything wrong. So how is that not terrorism? And them blowing up a cafe or whatever, how is that more terroristic than the security forces rounding up thousands of people who had nothing to do with anything and then killing some of them just go missing? Like, are they really any better? Yeah, so So I don't know. It presents a very, and again, it's kind of why I do like this episode, because it presents a very gray sort of area where, and I think had it had a simple message of, oh, these terrorists are obviously bad, evil, then it wouldn't have been as good of an episode. The fact that it does bring in these, that maybe Beverly's wrong, maybe Picard's wrong in this situation. Now, let me get into another major point where I totally agree with Finn, is that he captures Beverly and abducts Beverly, and Beverly keeps saying, we're not involved in your conflict, we're only here to help. And he's like, but you are involved. Now, there are a lot of Star Trek episodes where, like, I'm thinking of the episode Cloud Minders, for example, where the troglodytes were being obtuse. They were being stupid by saying, oh, Starfleet Federation, you're here to oppress us. You're here to help our enemies. And they're like, no, we're just here for the freaking gas. In which case, that was totally true. They were being ridiculous by suggesting that, oh, you're here to hunt us down. And there's other episodes of Star Trek where that's also the case, where the aliens are being like obtuse by being like, oh, Starfleet, you're here to get involved, you're here to hunt us down. But it's like, no, they're not. But in this case, I actually side with Finn, actually, because first of all, the episode in the opening Captain's Log mentioned that the Federation is trading partners with the Routines. So the dominant alien species that apparently is oppressing another country that wants to be deemed independent, Federation doesn't seem to have any issues with that. Yeah, that's kind of shady, isn't it? See, and I think, again, this is kind of a result of that whole line that was thrown in there about, oh, they want their independence, we didn't want to give it to them. I think that was a lazy way to say, hey, we're doing an analogy on Ireland. But it doesn't get into the details, and so that creates a lot of problems. It was just a throwaway line that was not explored, and so that created problems in the episode. Why is the Federation having a trading partner with an alien who is oppressing members of their own species? Maybe they're not oppressing them, but the episode doesn't fucking tell me, so I have to assume that they are. And so, yeah, and plus one that's in conflict, that there's, bombs going off, whatever. Why is the Federation trading with them? And not only that, the Starfleet purposely chooses to give them medical supplies. And they could call it, a humanitarian effort, but the fact is they're giving aid to the Ansata's enemy. So the Ansata is fighting. For the sake of argument, let's just say that the Ansata are not bombing children or cafes, that they are limiting themselves to military targets. And Federation shows up and gives them medical supplies. Well, that gives them the Routines an advantage over the Ansata, because if the Ansata tries to kill them, they have all these medical supplies where they can save their people. And however, the Ansata don't have these medical supplies, so when the Routines try to kill them, they're more successful at doing that, so they are going to win the war. It gives them an advantage. So, yeah, I think I totally actually agree with Finn. And it's funny because at the end when he adopts Picard, he spells out his plan, that he's going to use Picard as a hostage in order to force the Federation to mediate. And he knows that the Federation isn't going to really want to be there and want to be involved, because he rightfully points out how distasteful it is for the Starfleet Federation to be involved in internal conflicts of other species. So they're going to want to just close the matter as soon as possible. And so he would use that as a negotiation tactic to get everything he wants and have the Federation force other Routines to capitulate. And you know what? I think that's a damn good plan. I think that it would be successful. Had Wesley not figured out where they were and they weren't able to mount a rescue, that would have worked. But by the way, Finn saying, "Oh, I think I might have to kill Picard," that actually fucks up his plan. You got to keep Picard alive in order for the plan to work. So that line, I think, was thrown in there to raise the tension. Oh no, they're going to kill Picard. But strategically, that doesn't make any sense. He's much more valuable as a hostage. But of course, we couldn't have Picard being held hostage on this planet for 8 months. We have a show to tell here. But anyway, but theoretically, though, that was a good plan, and he was absolutely right about the Federation. He was absolutely right that they're just like, they would just come in and be like, what we know of the Federation from season 1, when with episodes like Code of Honor, they're just like, oh, just give them whatever they want so we can make peace. And that's exactly how they would have reacted, and they would have forced the routines, however you say them, to capitulate in ways that they never would normally. So it was actually a good plan. And he was actually correct in saying that Starfleet was involved in the conflict just by being there, by being trade partners, by giving them medical supplies. They were choosing sides whether or not they chose to admit it. And that's why I love the line when, when after Finn tells Picard his plan, Picard's like, oh, you're bringing another chair to the negotiation table, and he points out, well, you brought the chair, I'm just forcing you to sit in it. And again, he's 100% correct. I totally agree with him there. Now, some people see him as Finn as the obvious bad guy. And again, this comes into the episode not sort of getting into the detail of their actual motivations or the actual political situation. So I can't actually say if he's the bad guy or not. I mean, he's setting off bombs to kill children. He's definitely not a good guy, that's for damn sure. And I definitely disagree with his methods, his motives. But I actually don't think they're any worse than Section 31, and I've heard some people defend Section 31. But anyway, that's a topic of another time. But yeah, so if we had more information, it would be more dynamic. But there was a little bit of dynamic to it. There was a little bit of the fact that he actually did seem like an okay guy to a certain degree. And I think the interactions between him and Beverly were really, really good. I think the actor they had play this character was so good. I think he was a really good guest star. And I think Gates McFadden did a really good job in this episode too. I like to harp on her acting, but she actually did really well here. She gave a strong performance. It's now making me change my mind, because when I did this video naming the best episode she did, I named, or the best Beverly-centric episode, I named Symbiosis. And now I'm changing my mind. I'm thinking, actually, maybe it's this episode. Maybe this is the best Beverly episode. Keep in mind, I don't really like Remember Me. I know a lot of people like that. I don't. And there's all the other Beverly episodes like Suspicions or Sub Rosa or whatnot I think are terrible. So I don't typically like Beverly episodes, but this one is actually really good. And I think Gates McFadden did a really good job. And the aspect of, when he revealed he was drawing these pictures of her, and so he has a little crush on her, and Picard's reaction to that, oh, we could use this to our advantage. Like, that was so good. Like, that was such interesting stuff. Like, Beverly was taking this seriously. It was like, oh my God, this guy has a crush on me. What do I do? And how are we going to save this situation where Picard's thinking strategically? He's like, we can use this to our advantage. Like, I love that. That's so interesting. And I think, so I think there is a bit of dynamic to the character of Finn. Again, how he makes arguments about George Washington, and because I don't think those arguments are total bullshit, by the way. I think they're a bit weak, but I don't think they're total bullshit, which is what makes them interesting. I mean, the fact that he's blowing up buses with kids, that's not acceptable. Unless he says, but he never says in this episode that those were accidental. So yeah, that kind of takes credibility away from him, which is a shame. But would have been better if they made him a bit more ambiguous, because they definitely lean him more towards the villain type. But they do give him a little bit of dynamic again. But I like the way that he is so callous about killing is a point that they hammer home, and that's interesting. And this is where the dynamic about his son was killed in detention, where the security forces were indiscriminately killing just as much as he was, and I think that dynamic makes it really good. It's a positive because it shows that he has a point. He has a point to be bitter, and maybe there's a reason why he's so callous towards killing, because that's the way he was treated. But again, I wish the episode went into more detail. Is this people being oppressed? Is there apartheid? Is there slavery? Or is there anything like that? Like, there should have been more, but then again, they just wanted to do a lazy Northern Ireland analogy instead of like making it more interesting. Don't just say terrorism bad, like give us more. But again, as I said, they did make it a little dynamic. Yeah, so it is interesting, though, that this early 90s perspective of terrorism, because, post 9/11, people would have a very, very different idea of terrorism. and so, so had there been an episode about terrorism, which there was an Enterprise, by the way, after 9/11, then it would have come off, used it more as a, but there were Middle Eastern terrorists even, in the 70s, 80s. But I guess, so they could have focused more on that, but they wanted to do more of an analogy of Ireland or whatever. But, it's also interesting thinking about, because you can think of, terrorism bad, but then you get into Deep Space Nine with the Bajoran terrorists. They're considered good. And even though it's pointed out that they did kill some civilians, which is a point that the excellent episode Duet brought out, was how many civilians did you kill? And those are excellent points. But still, even though we know this, throughout the entirety of Deep Space Nine, Bajoran terrorists are portrayed as the good guys. And so that sort of takes away from the point of this episode that terrorism bad is like, well, what about the Bajoran terrorists? Are they bad? What about the Maquis? They're kind of the bad guys-ish, but we're trying to sympathize with them. So they go into more gray area with terrorism, which, again, post 9/11 is something that they dare not do. Definitely wouldn't have done that. But anyway, that's more of a Deep Space Nine thing. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to bring up with this episode. I can't really think of it. The Wesley plot was interesting. I like how Picard, when Wesley's like, let me permission to beam down with the away team, and Picard's like, no. But actually, I want you to be on the team to help, discover what this transporting thing is. That was actually really smart of him. He was like, again, he's a much better character in season 3, that he was able to sort of see that Wesley needed to be kept busy instead of trying to placate him and like, go take some time off, or pat him on the head. You're too close to this, go away. It was better to be like, no, I'm going to keep you busy, keep your mind occupied, and keep you productive, by the way, so that you don't worry too much about, it'll let you help in a way that's actually very helpful. And that was very, very smart of Picard to do that. Worf got to kick a couple people's ass on the planet too, so everyone's saying Worf doesn't fight enough. I think we did see him fight again. He did get phasered on the bridge, but he can't win them all. That's fine. God. What? Oh, so I wanted to talk about Gates McFadden and Beverly Crusher, because I watched an interview with Gates recently where she said that coming back to the show in season 3 was a bit awkward to her because she felt like she kind of lost her characters and that the writing kind of was different for Beverly. And she said that she felt like the writers were still writing for Pulaski and that her character was acting more like Pulaski than she was the Beverly Crusher who was in season 1. And I was like, I didn't see that. I was like, I don't see that. But then I saw this episode and I was like, oh, no, I see it. I see it in this episode. For example, the opening scene where, the bomb blew up and Beverly wanted to provide medical aid to these people because there's no other medical forces there. And Picard's like, this is dangerous. You should beam up now. And she was like, no, I don't want to hear it. I'm not beaming up. Crush her out. And, Picard turns to Riker, and Riker's like, I don't want to see her face in the transporter room if you beam her up against her will. That does seem way more Pulaski thing than it does a Crusher. But to be fair, I never thought of it that way until just now because I saw Beverly Crusher in later seasons. And this didn't seem too incredibly out of character for her. And particularly in later seasons. Because she does really... And even in earlier Symbiosis, she was very forceful and stuck up for what she believed in. And in later seasons as well, she was like, yeah... I could see... So I never had a problem with this. I always thought it worked for her. But I could definitely... When I think in terms of... Does this fit Pulaski more than it fits Crusher? It kind of does, actually, when I think in that way. So maybe that's what she was talking about. And then also, just the way that she was being sort of very antagonistic, refusing to talk to Finn. That was exactly what Pulaski did when she was taken captive by Moriarty, by the way. Just sat there and refused to talk. But how she was being very sort of indigent. But also the other thing that should be noted is I also saw an interview with Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote this episode, who said that she actually preferred Pulaski over Crusher, and she didn't like that they brought Crusher back in season 3. She liked Pulaski not because she was a McCoy type character, but because she was a strong, independent woman who didn't put up with shit from anyone. She liked that character, and she didn't think there was in Crusher more. So I think part of her was probably wanting to make Crusher more like that, to make her more like Pulaski. But ultimately, I don't have an issue with it. As I said, I think it fits into Crusher's character fine, especially knowing the rest of the show, seeing where her character goes. When I watch this episode, it doesn't seem out of place. Why is Crusher acting so out of character? No, I don't get that at all. I think it's totally within her character. But thinking about that, seeing it from that perspective, it could be seen as more Pulaski-esque or better fitting, dialogue that fits Pulaski better, and that might be because of Melinda Snodgrass, who preferred Pulaski. Which, by the way, she's wrong. Crusher's way better than Pulaski. Sorry. Starting to disagree with Melinda Snodgrass a lot. She also said the original series was better than Next Generation. She's wrong about that, too. And she's wrong about Pulaski being. No, Crusher's way better. Fuck Pulaski. She sucked up. Good riddance there. God damn, so glad. Also, I wouldn't have bought Finn being in love with Pulaski. I'm sorry. I wouldn't have. Crusher? Oh, totally. Totally buy that. And I think Gates McFadden does just such a guy. I just really don't see Pulaski working in this episode as well. I just don't. But anyway, I guess I could briefly talk about the terrorist setting a bomb and Geordi, defusing it. That was cool. That was good work. I like that. The whole thing of the interdimensional shifting, but that being a sort of more sneaky way to transport that can be detected, but it causes you to die, and there's no ways around it. That was a good plot point. That was a good addition to the episodes. That all worked for me. So anyway, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'm very humble, very thankful for everyone's support. So I'll just give a quick shout out to Tetson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavalles, Alessandro Miglasio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neilhouse. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a couple of patron comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "It's over, Mark. Star Trek has the high ground." Good job. I really like that one. that is a good one. Yes, I will applaud you for that. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "One line of dialogue in this episode was banned in the UK and Ireland for years due to a line from Data in reference to the Provisional Irish Army, IRA, and the reunification of Ireland in 2024. The episode was originally banned in the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, not airing in the usual running order on the BBC in 2006. It was shown on Sky One, which had assumed the broadcast rights, with the relevant line edited out. It was eventually shown unedited on the BBC Two on September 29, 2007, in the after midnight repeat slot. It has never been shown on RTE, which is the national TV station in Ireland. Well, that answers my question. It was Ireland where they never showed it on TV. The reunification of Ireland will not happen unless... God, I should have looked up the pronunciation of this name. Sorry. Sinn Féin. I'm sorry. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm really sorry. Unless Sinn Féin gets power in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland at the same time, it will be a dark day for Ireland if that ever happens. I have faith in the Irish people to refuse Sinn Féin attempt of getting real power in the Republic of Ireland. 30 years down the road, unfortunately, they will get in. Maybe sooner. I will stop saying anything more or give names. My rating is a 7 out of 10. And you can tell that I actually know nothing about the issue, as I already mentioned, as I don't know how to pronounce that thing. I don't even know what that is. But, yeah, I should really study this topic. I'm kind of interested. I just... too busy at the moment. But anywho, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, "Yeah, there's a little Crusher is giving into Stockholm Syndrome here in this episode, but I admit it is quite interesting. Even if it is, ironically, seems ho-hum compared to most of Season 3 episodes. 8 out of 10. I suppose you could say that Crusher is giving into Stockholm Syndrome. But I don't know. Maybe I gave into it too, because I kind of agreed with her. I kind of saw her point of view. But because she didn't totally be like, oh no, don't kill Finn, he's such a good guy, or whatever. She still saw him as a monster who didn't give a shit about killing people, but she just understood him better. So I don't know, maybe that would fall under Stockholm Syndrome, but I'm just seeing that as her having an open mind. Like, she never thought it was okay that he abducted her. But, anywho. So, next comment is from Brandon Neilhouse, who says, "I wish I liked this episode more. Why are the Federation even trading with this planet? Crusher's behavior in deciding to treat the bomb victims is stupid. Everyone is so surprised by the Ansata groups appearing and disappearing without using transporters, but I'm sure the inhabitants of the planet that kidnapped the Enterprise children did something very similar, which is ironic given the role children play in this episode. The routine security chief is far too strident to be a likable or sympathetic character. She annoys the hell out of me every time she speaks." Yeah, that's a good point. Referring to the what was that episode called? When the Bow Breaks, that they had like this teleporter or transporting technology that also couldn't be detected like normal transporters would. But I don't know. Like, I still feel like these guys are not anywhere near as advanced as those people were. So I could still, but they knew what it was. They said it was like the dimensional shifting. So they've heard of this device. It's just kills you when you use it. I thought it was pretty interesting. Anyway, thank you so much for your comments. So my rating for The High Ground, which is over because I have it. Till I reach the higher ground. Oh, sorry. It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground. I've watched the high ground. No, sorry. My rating for The High Ground out of 10 is a 7. Very good. So I really liked this episode, even though apparently others did not. Were apparently the writers of this episode that didn't really like it. Mainly because of the scenes between Beverly and Finn. I think they were really good, really well acted. I think Gates McFadden's probably is her best episode, or one of them anyway. And yeah, I do like the fact that it brings in some sort of moral gray areas, sort of examines the topic of terrorism without being too preachy, and I think that actually works. And I like how, because Finn makes some good points about the Federation, which I think he's on point, and I think they do a really good job with, Wesley sort of dealing with his mother being abducted, and Picard like doing everything he can to and Riker being sort of maybe naive about the situation. Yeah, I think that all works for me. But I can't really give this episode... I was thinking about giving it an 8, but I can't give it an 8 because they should have went into more detail. They were being a bit too vague. Because... And I think, I needed to know more information about this in order to really sort of feel invested in it. And because they just wanted to be more generic Ireland analogy rather than telling me more about the actual fictional political situation, it kind of took away from the episode for me. And I think that they could have been more morally gray as well, because so as is, the Routians were good guys who do some morally questioned things, or sort of taken to the brink, and so they're not perfect angels. They've done some terrible things in the past, but it's seen as part of dealing with terrorism. And then the Ansata are portrayed as the bad guys, but you can kind of understand where they're coming from because they've been mistreated a bit as well, and they do have kind of a point, but they're ultimately the bad guys. So I think it would have been better if there were no good guys or bad guys. I think it would have been better if they were both portrayed as partly in the right and partly in the wrong. But as is, they make it too much that Ansata is in the wrong, which is too much, hey, terrorism bad, rather than, give me more. What are the dynamics involved, the good and bad, of terrorism, like they did, for example, with the Bajoran terrorists, who, by the way, you can't say... One of the objections you might have to what I just said is, it can't ever portray terrorism as good, but they did. In Deep Space Nine, the Bajoran terrorists were totally portrayed as the good guys. So, and I'm not saying portray them as the good guys. I'm saying show the dynamics, show the all sides, be a bit more morally gray. I thought that would have been way more interesting, personally. And the whole analogy just wasn't as thought out as it could have been. But still, I think a solid episode. Definitely entertaining watch. Definitely makes you think, and definitely has some good performances. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. So that is it for my review of The High Ground. And now let me just consult my schedule. to see what's coming up next on my channel. Alright, so Saturday will be on my also, yeah, my schedule that I mentioned in the previous videos got all out of whack because I changed it a bit, but that's all good. I'll tell you the right schedule now. So Saturday will be my revisited for Deja Q, which I will do over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters. I'll revisit my review for Deja Q that I had already made. And then on Monday, we'll be back on my channel for a public video for A Matter of Perspective, where I review that episode. And then on Wednesday, back over on Patreon for another revisited, this time for yesterday's Enterprise, revisiting my review for yesterday's Enterprise. And then Thursday, staying on Patreon for another revisited, this time for The Offspring. Like 2 amazing episodes in a row. Jeez. And so I'll revisit my review for The Offspring on Thursday. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation, and also doing many more videos on many more Star Trek topics, as well as other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.